There are men who change history, and then there are men who become history. Men whose lives grow so large, so consequential, that the story the world tells about them and the truth begin to drift apart. Jose Rizal Mercado Alonso y Rialunda, novelist, doctor, poet, polyglot, born in 1861 in Calamba, Laguna, executed officially on the morning of December 30, 1896, on the field of Bagong Bayan. He was 35 years old. In the century and more that followed, Rizal was enshrined as the national hero of the Philippines, his face placed on the peso, his name given to a province, a park, 100 streets, 1,000 schools. And yet, the more a man is elevated, the more shadows gather beneath him, because not everyone was satisfied with the official story. Not everyone believed the monuments told the whole truth. Some asked questions that textbooks would not answer. What if the execution was staged? What if the man we call a hero was something far more dangerous? What if even his novels were not entirely his own? In this video, we do not come to tear down Jose Rizal. We come to examine the shadows, to hold its theory to the light, to ask the questions history left open. To understand why these theories exist, we must first understand the world that created them. The late 19th century Philippines was a colony on the edge of revolution. For more than 300 years, Spain had ruled these islands through the sword, through the cross, and through a system designed to keep a people dependent, obedient, and afraid. But by the 1880s, something has shifted. A generation of young Filipinos had traveled to Europe. They had read Voltaire and Rousseau. They had breathed the air of reform, and some of them had begun to write. None more powerfully than a young man from Laguna. When Jose Rizal published No Limitangere in 1887, the tremor was felt from Manila to Madrid. A novel that dared to name the abuse of the friars, that dared to put colonial cruelty on the page, in the mouths of fully realized Filipino characters who felt, who suffered, and who resisted. It was not merely a book. It was an accusation, and the colony's ruling class knew it. Rizal was monitored, exiled to the Pitan in 1892, and when revolution finally broke out in 1896, he was arrested, not for fighting, but for the crime of having inspired those who did. On the morning of December 30, 1896, he was marched to the field at Bagong Bayan. He asked to face his executioners. That request was denied. 7 shots rang out. And that, according to the official record, was the end. But for some, it was only the beginning of the questions. Let us begin with the most dramatic claim of all. December 30, 1896. A man walks across a field. He hears the command to halt. He hears the rifles raised behind him. 7 shots. A body falls. But what if the body that fell was not his? This is the first conspiracy theory, and in many ways, the most enduring. Jose Rizal did not die at Bagumbayan. The execution was staged, and for decades afterward, he lived quietly under a different name in the hidden places of the archipelago. Proponents of this theory points to the chaos of the era. Late 19th century record keeping was far from infallible. There was no fingerprinting, no forensic verification, no DNA. And in the years following 1896, stories began to surface. Elderly men in rural provinces who spoke with unusual education, who carried themselves differently, who, when pressed, would sometimes speak of a life they would not fully explain. But were any of these men Rizal? Historians are almost unanimously skeptical. The execution was witnessed by Spanish military officials, Catholic priests, foreign dignitaries, and members of the public. Detailed records were kept. His remains were later exhumed and identified. For this theory to be true, the conspiracy would need to span dozens of individuals, enemies, bureaucrats, and soldiers, all maintaining silence for the rest of their lives. History tells us, almost certainly, Jose Rizal died on that field. And yet, the stories persist. Perhaps because we need them to. Because some men feel too important to simply end. On the surface, the division seemed clear. Andres Bonifacio led the revolution. The Katipunan, the masses, the Bolo, and the barricade. Jose Rizal wrote, and publicly, explicitly, repeatedly, rejected violent revolt. But conspiracy theorists ask, was that rejection genuine? Or was it the perfect cover? Theory number 2 proposes that Rizal was the hidden architect of the revolution. That while publicly distancing himself from armed conflict, he was privately guiding the Katipunan from the shadows. His novels as coded manifestos. His correspondence as covert instruction. The evidence cited. His novels did not merely inspire, they radicalized. They named the enemy. They gave the movement its moral vocabulary. Katipunan members did not simply admire Rizal. They invoked him. His name was used as a symbolic password. He was, to many fighters, not just a writer, but a prophet. But here is what the record shows. Rizal's letters, preserved and studied, are consistent in their opposition to armed rebellion. He believed reform, not revolution, was the correct path. He even wrote to Bonifacio urging restraint. When the revolution broke out, Rizal was already under arrest. He learned of the uprising from his captors. The more nuanced truth may be this. Rizal was the spark. Bonifacio was the fire. One man lit the imagination of a people. Another channeled that imagination into action. To conflate the two is to misunderstand both. But influence, undeniable, seismic, transformative influence, does not require a conspiracy to be real. Of all the controversies surrounding Rizal, this one may be the most consequential. And unlike some theories on this list, this one has never been fully resolved. The question is this: in the final hours before his execution, did Jose Rizal retract his criticisms of the Roman Catholic Church and die a reconciled Catholic? A document surfaced claiming exactly that. A retraction, signed, allegedly, in Rizal's own hand, witnessed by priests, returning him to the faith he had publicly criticized. The church maintained the retraction was genuine. Secular scholars and nationalists were and remain deeply skeptical. The document did not surface immediately after his death. Questions arose about the handwriting. The testimonies of witnesses were inconsistent. Some who were present left conflicting accounts. And critically, Rizal's final poem, Mi Ultimo Adios, did not read like the work of a man who had abandoned his convictions. It reads like a work of someone at peace with himself, not necessarily with the institution he had spent his career critiquing. What makes this theory, unlike the others, so difficult to dismiss is that it lives not on the realm of fantasy, but in the realm of genuine historical dispute. Credentialed historians on both sides have staked their reputations on opposing conclusions. The original document exists, the debate is real, and the truth may be one of those rare things that history simply cannot deliver. Jose Rizal spent years in Europe. He studied in Madrid. He lived in Paris. He spent significant time in Germany, in Heidelberg, in Berlin, where he refined his medical training, published his novels, and moved among the intellectual elite of the continent. He spoke more than 20 languages. He corresponded with scientists, politicians, writers, reformers. He was, by any measure, a man of extraordinary range. And so, inevitably, someone asked, was he also a spy? Theory number 4 suggests that Rizal's years in Europe were not merely academic, that behind his books and his biology and his brilliant conversations, he was gathering intelligence for Germany, for another foreign power, or perhaps for a network of reformists using espionage to advance their political agenda. The evidence for his theory is sparse. There are no intelligence records, no decoded messages, no credible account from any European archive that places Rizal in the role of operative. What is true is that Rizal was politically aware, acutely so. He understood the global power dynamics of his era. He knew what European powers thought of colonial territories like the Philippines. But awareness is not espionage. Engagement is not betrayal. This theory says more about our cultural fascination with a secret agent than it does about Jose Rizal. We want our heroes to be operatives, to have moved through history's shadows with purpose beyond the page. But sometimes, a brilliant man studying ophthalmology in Heidelberg is simply a brilliant man studying ophthalmology in Heidelberg. We have arrived at the theory that stops people cold. The claim that has been repeated on the internet, in fringe publications, and in hashed incredulous conversations for decades. The claim that Jose Rizal, national hero of the Philippines, physician, humanist, martyr, was Jack the Ripper. Yes, that Jack the Ripper. The argument, such as it is, goes like this. Rizal had medical knowledge, the kind that could explain the surgical precision attributed to the Ripper's crimes. He was in Europe during the late 1880s, and the Ripper was never identified. Therefore, the theory suggests, why not Rizal? Here is why not Rizal. Rizal's whereabouts during the autumn of 1888, the period of the Whitechapel murders, are documented. His letters, his correspondences, his travel records place him elsewhere. Furthermore, the characterization of the Ripper's murders as requiring surgical expertise has been disputed by forensic historians for years. The precision was inconsistent. The motive never established, but perhaps most importantly, the entire theory rests on nothing more than circumstantial proximity to an era, not a location, not a method, not a single piece of evidence. This theory is not history. It is not even good speculation. It is sensationalism wearing a deerstalker hat. And yet, we mention it because its existence tells us something. When a figure becomes mythic enough, the world projects everything onto them. Hero, villain, spy, revolutionary, even apparently Victorian serial killer. Jose Rizal was many things, but he was not this. No Limitangere, El Filibusterismo. Two novels that shook an empire. Two works of fiction so precise in their social diagnosis, so rich in their character, so devastating in their moral argument, that Spanish authorities banned them outright, and Rizal was ultimately executed partly for having written them. But what if he didn't write them? Not entirely anyway. Theory number 6 suggests that Rizal's novels were ghost-written, or at least heavily co-authored, by other members of the Filipino propaganda movement, men like Marcelo H. del Pilar, Graciano Lopez Haina, intellectuals who surrounded Rizal in Europe and shared his reformist vision. The argument leans on the novel's complexity. Rizal finished No Limitangere when he was just 25 years old. The scope is enormous, the characters numerous and layered, the social critique multidimensional. Could one young man working alone have produced this? The evidence says yes. Draft manuscripts exist in Rizal's hand. The letters from period of writing describe the work in intimate, personal details, not as a collaborative project, but as a private obsession. The writing style consistent across both novels and across his shorter works. His contemporaries praised him. They did not claim credit. What this theory really reflects is a kind of unconscious condescension, an unwillingness to accept that a Filipino man in 1887, writing in Spanish, working alone in a rented room in Berlin, could produce work of such devastating brilliance? Well, he could, and he did. After Spain came America. In 1898, following the official American war in the Treaty of Paris, the Philippines was purchased. Yes, purchased for $20 million. A new colonial master and a new educational system. Theory number 7 asks a pointed political question. Did the United States manufacture Jose Rizal as the national hero, deliberately elevating him over more radical figures because a peaceful intellectual was easier to colonize around than a revolutionary fighter? The argument is not without some foundation. The Americans, in building their colonial educational system, emphasized Rizal, the reformist, the writer, the man who opposed violent rebellion, over figures like Andres Bonifacio and Apolinario Mapini, who more represented armed and uncompromising resistance. A colony is more manageable when its hero teaches pen over the sword. But here is the complication. Rizal was already celebrated before the Americans arrived. His execution under the Spanish had made him a martyr. His novels were already in Filipino homes. His name was already on Filipino lips. The Americans did not create the Rizal legend. They amplified it. They shaped and directed a reverence that already existed, and in doing so, perhaps redirected it away from more inconvenient heroes. This theory holds a kernel of uncomfortable truth. Rizal's heroism is real, earned, and genuine. But the architecture of his official elevation, the mechanics of who decided and when and why, that is worth examining. History is always written by someone, and it is always written for someone. Here is something that is not a theory. Jose Rizal was in fact a Freemason. He joined a lodge in Madrid in 1883. He was an active participant in the Masonic movement in Spain and later in the Philippines. This is documented. This is confirmed. But for some, this fact is not the beginning of the story. It is merely the surface. Theory number 8 proposes that Rizal's membership in Freemasonry was not simply a reformist affiliation, but a link to a global brotherhood that orchestrated political events across continents. That his revolutionary writings were not merely his own conscience, but the output of a hidden agenda programmed from above. This theory flourishes in an environment where Freemasonry is viewed not as a philosophical fraternity, but a shadow government. The reality is more grounded. The Masonic movement in 19th century Spain was deeply connected to liberal reform, to anti-clericalism, to constitutional government, to Enlightenment principles. Rizal's participation fit naturally alongside his other intellectual commitments. His lodge was reform-oriented, not global conspiracy. What is worth noting, however, is that Rizal's Masonic ties did intensify the church hostility towards him. The friars were not paranoid in identifying Freemasonry as a threat to their influence. Masonic lodges genuinely opposed clerical power. The conspiracy theory exaggerates a real affiliation into something cosmic, but the affiliation itself, in its political significance, was absolutely real. On the surface, the answer seems simple. Rizal was tried by a military court, convicted of rebellion, sedition, and conspiracy, sentenced to death, signed by the Governor General. End of story. Or is it? Theory number 9 shifts the question from who signed the order to who truly wanted him dead. The Catholic Church, this theory argues, was the real architect of Rizal's execution. The friars, whose abuses Rizal so devastatingly documented, used their enormous influence over the colonial government to ensure that the most dangerous pen in the archipelago would never write again. This argument has real historical grounding. The friar orders in the Philippines wielded extraordinary political power. Their relationship with the colonial government was intimate and mutually reinforcing. They had every reason to want Rizal silenced, and there is substantial evidence that church officials did advocate for the harshest possible treatment of Rizal. But the execution was ordered by Spanish civil and military authority. The church influenced, but it did not decide. What Rizal's execution actually represents is more complex and more chilling than a single villain. It was the collision of imperial anxiety, clerical resentment, and political fear. A system designed to protect itself, in all its moving parts working, in their own interest, toward the same conclusion. There was no single mastermind. There was a structure. And sometimes, structures are more dangerous than conspirators. Our final theory is the most human of them all. Not about politics, not about empires, not about who gave an order or who held a pen or who walked on what shadow. This theory is about blood. Did Jose Rizal leave behind descendants? Hidden children perhaps, born of relationships that history or circumstance or discretion chose not to record. Rizal was a man of deep feeling. His correspondence reveals a capacity for love, both passionate and tender. He was engaged to Leonor Rivera for years, a relationship destroyed by distance and parental interference. In Dapitan, during his exile, he met and lived with Josephine Bracken. Josephine carried a child. The boy was born prematurely. He lived only hours. No child survived. No verified descendants are on record, and yet the theory persists. Families have claimed descent. DNA projects have been proposed. The romantic imagination of a nation refuses to believe that a man of such vitality left no living echo. Perhaps this theory endures not because of evidence, but because of need. We want part of Rizal to still be alive. We want some thread of him to continue in the present. We want the story to not have ended on that field at Bagong Bayan. And perhaps that impulse, that refusal to let him fully go, is in itself a kind of love. We have walked through 10 theories, some built on fragments of historical ambiguity, some born from political calculation, some rising, fully formed, from nothing more than imagination and need for drama. And now, what do we do with them? Here is what the best historical thinking suggests. The execution was real. The martyr died. His body was found, buried, exhumed, and returned to a nation's care. The weight of evidence is not ambiguous. The novels were his own. Drafts, letters, and consistent literary voice across decades confirm what common sense already suggests, that genius exists and does not always require a committee. The retraction remains genuinely debated. It is the only theory on this list that lives in the legitimate space of academic dispute. Scholars may argue it for another 100 years. His Masonic ties were real, but reformist, not conspirational. His political connections were genuine, earned through his own brilliance, not engineered by a hidden hand. His elevation by the Americans was in part politically convenient, but that convenience does not diminish the legitimacy of his heroism. And as for the Ripper, absolutely no. But here is the deeper question. Why do these theories exist at all? Why do they persist? Because conspiracy theories are not really about the subject. They are about the storytellers. They are about the people's relationship with their own history. When Filipinos argue about whether Rizal really died, they are really asking, can someone this precious be taken from us so simply? When they debate whether his novels were his own, they are really asking, could one of ours really have been that great? When they question who ordered the execution, they are really asking, how do power and faith collude to destroy what they fear? These are not foolish questions. They are the questions of a people still negotiating their past, still deciding what to believe, still deciding, generation after generation, what Rizal means. In the end, the man does not need the myths. The man is sufficient. A physician who treated the poor of the Pitan, a novelist who gave colonized people a mirror to see themselves in dignity, a poet who wrote his final verses the night before he died, folded them into a tiny square, and hid them in a small lamp to be found by his sister. A man who walked across a field at dawn, knowing was about to happen, and who chose, in that final moment, to fall forward, to face the sunrise. Jose Rizal does not need conspiracy to be extraordinary. He simply needs to be seen. And perhaps that is the final truth these theories point toward. We keep inventing mysteries about him because we are not yet done understanding what is already there. From hidden identities to secret societies to forged documents and ghost-written masterpieces, the life of Jose Rizal has become the canvas on which a nation paints its deepest questions. Some of these theories collapse under scrutiny. Others remain stubbornly in the unlit corners of the record, but they all reveal one enduring truth. When a man becomes a legend, when a story becomes a nation, the questions never truly stop. Jose Protasio Rizal Mercado Alonso y Rialunda